Hello and welcome back to Uncovered, where I give you a rapid-fire rundown of the latest titles added to Xbox Game Pass that I won't be covering in First 15. As a reminder, this isn't a ranking or review, I'm just telling you what's new. Starting with Little Nightmares 2, the follow-up to the beloved Little Nightmares from Tarsier Studios based in Sweden, who are also working on a new game, Reanimal, which you've probably seen footage of already since I think it was announced last year. This return to Nowhere and the Pale City sees you playing as Mono, an eventual companion to Six from the first game, turning the very successful formula of the first game, to which this is a narrative prequel, into a cooperative experience, incorporating new puzzles and combat while maintaining the scares and the semi-surrealist atmosphere. There isn't much to share about it in terms of pros and cons, since it's a critically acclaimed game that players love, with the only gripe I typically see about it being that the combat can feel cumbersome to control. So if you're looking to take a big bite out of this small world, you can play Little Nightmares 2 right now on Game Pass. And if you don't have Game Pass, despite watching the series that's all about it, Bandai Namco is having their summer sale on Steam until July 10th, so you can pick this up over there for $3. Next is Volcano Princess, which is a care sim with RPG elements. Like a more advanced Tamagotchi, only instead of raising a weird pixelated creature, you're raising a kid. And the game's been compared a lot to the Princess Maker series in theory, not necessarily in practice. As a parent, you'll contribute directly to the choices your daughter makes and who she ultimately becomes, spending quality time together on hobbies, improving her social skills, sending her off to school to advance her education, and helping her navigate the world of good and evil, lords and love. You can also get to know the NPCs. You'll uncover different mini-games, challenges, and story beats as your kid ages, making the stats you imbue her with meaningful as you progress, and there are multiple endings from multiple paths that add to its replayability, given that you'll piece more of the true story together with bits that you get from each run. The game released a few years ago, and while reception has been warm overall, there are a lot of complaints about the same things. Mainly the lack of a decent tutorial, localization issues with terrible English translations given that the developers are Chinese, or at least based in China, technical problems like crashing, and questionable choices surrounding the age of the characters your daughter can romance, which isn't a functional problem, but it does tie into the game's mechanics, so it's worth mentioning. Basically, this seems like one of those buyer beware sort of games where people enjoy it for what it is if they can get past the flaws it has. So if you're willing to give it a shot, you can go ahead and play Volcano Princess right now on Game Pass. Next is The Alters from 11-Bit Studios, the developers behind hits like This War of Mine, Moonlighter, and two of my personal favorites, Indica and Frostpunk. It's a survival game where you play as the last remaining crew member of an expedition trying to escape a hostile planet with the help of your duplicates called Alters. The game is a refreshing genre hybrid, combining third-person exploration, modular base building, and resource management, with a day-night cycle that influences environmental hazards. But the narrative is the highlight, revolving not only around your survival, but the relationship you build with your alters, who are alternate versions of you from timelines where you made different decisions in life. The story features branching paths and multiple endings, and it promises to be an existential journey worthy of the price, which for you would be nothing since it's included with Game Pass. It's been incredibly well received, with most players touting it as either their new favorite game or the best game they've ever played, with the main complaint I've seen not being much of a complaint at all, the fact that it's more story-rich than gameplay-oriented, so you should go into it more for the experience than for the mechanics. There were some actual complaints, though, about it running poorly on Linux, balancing issues with the environmental threats as you get farther in, a lackluster distinction between the different endings, and some bugs. But those complaints were far and few between compared to the glowing praise. So if you love sci-fi and you're looking for something that could pass more for therapy than a survival game, why not give The Alters a try right now on Game Pass? Next, we have Symphonia, a game I was happy to see because I gave it a shout on my channel 4 years ago when it was just a student project. It's a puzzle platformer where you play as a violinist building an orchestra to save the world. And the highlight here, beyond the art style, is the beauty of the environments and the soundtrack, comprised of original compositions inspired by the Romantic period and performed by an actual orchestra. The platforming incorporates music, with the character having unique traversal skills centered around his violin. And while the precision required might make the game difficult for some, there are no enemies, so you can take your time getting used to the levels and controls. It's another game that's been well received, with some players comparing it to the charms of Celeste and Hollow Knight, though it's a much smaller title you may not hear a lot of places talk about. And the only negatives I've come across were due to a game-breaking bug on console that, according to the most recent feedback I've seen, has since been fixed. I'm not sure how long Symphonia is, but as a music lover who appreciates hand-drawn art, I'm probably going to play this one myself, and I'm really glad to see it in full release. So if it seems like a good fit for you too, you can jump into Symphonia right now on Game Pass. Next up is Rematch from Slowclap, the studio that brought us Absolver and Sifu, an incredible game I've been playing through that may or may not make an appearance on the channel. Rematch is a third-person 5v5 online multiplayer soccer game, and that's pretty much all you need to know. There's no single-player campaign, and no offline modes outside of practice and free play, and the developers said they want to focus on the multiplayer experience, so that's not likely to change, though there will be 4v4 and 3v3 matches available if they haven't been added already by the time you see this. As a multiplayer game, you'll be controlling one player and relying on your teammates in other roles. And while the mechanics seek to provide an immersive football, aka soccer experience, it leans more towards arcade-style gameplay than realism, which is probably why I've seen it compared to Rocket League with humans. The reception has been promising so far, with some caveats, mainly that the gameplay is a ton of fun, especially with friends, but there are still a lot of kinks to work out, including crashing, some balancing issues, and netcode problems. I've also seen a recurring sentiment that the game played and felt better during the beta than it does in full release. Regardless, if you're a fan of soccer and the way Slowclap delivers on a game's controls, you may want to jump in for some Rematch on Game Pass. Next, we've got FBC Firebreak, which is a 3-player cooperative first-person shooter from Remedy Entertainment set in the world of Control. The gameplay is objective-based, with you and your team serving as the Bureau's first responders, there to put out fires, blast anomalies, and keep things under control. Each player has their own unique weapon and toolkit with special abilities that work well on their own and even better in tandem, like using water to soak a horde of enemies so your teammate can electrocute them. So it's a co-op game that benefits most from the cooperative part, and there are some cool elements to keep things fresh, like anomalies that can modify the levels and gameplay. Despite Remedy's pedigree, reception is up in the air, with many players enjoying the game at its core, likening the cooperative style to the quirks of games like Lethal Company and Deep Rock, just under the FPS umbrella. But there seems to be a consensus that there isn't enough there, with a lack of rich customization, weapons variety, and a deeper connection to Control's lore. One of the biggest complaints, though, is that it currently lacks any kind of in-game chat, and that's pretty important for co-op. So if you loved Control and want a fun game to play with your friends, FBC Firebreak might be it. Just keep in mind that it may feel like you've seen everything it has to offer in a few hours, at least for now. Next is Crypt Custodian, a Metroidvania where you play as a dead cat doomed by the Guardian of the Afterlife to clean up the place for all eternity. There's a large world full of puzzles to solve, secrets to find, and NPCs to learn about, and you can upgrade and customize your abilities. It was released last year to a ton of praise for its polish, cute aesthetic, and attention to quality of life details. I had to search for prevailing criticisms because the game is so well liked. But the knocks I did see were that the combat feels like repetitive button mashing, and the game as a whole doesn't bring anything new to the table or do anything better than what's already out there. And even those critiques were prefaced with there being things to love about the game. It's also worth mentioning that it's by solo dev Kyle Thompson, though I believe his brother makes the music. While I don't want to detract from this game, the fact that it centers around the afterlife reminded me of another game that I'm genuinely upset hasn't gotten any attention despite being one of the most stylish, unexpected, engaging games I've played in a long time. It's a game called Haunty, which I'll link to in the box. I don't want to spoil anything about it, so all I'll say is not to let the simplicity of Haunty's intro fool you. When I started it, I thought it was going to be a basic game with bare bones mechanics and that I'd lose interest pretty quick, but I kept playing, and not only did I fall in love with it, I enjoyed it so much that I went full completionist and 100%ed it, which is something I never do. I wouldn't call Haunty a Metroidvania, but there's still that satisfying sense of opening paths and backtracking in meaningful ways that make progress rewarding, and the story, world, and characters are really unique. So, if Crypt Custodian looks like your cup of tea, you can check it out now on Game Pass, but if you also want to experience a criminally underrated gem, please give Haunty a try. While that game's no longer free, it's still a fantastic time and worth spreading the word about. Moving on to a heftier release, we've got Metaphor Refantatio, developed by Atlus, the makers of Persona. It's a fantasy RPG set in a world where the death of the king prompts a tournament to decide who'll assume the throne. And if you've played their games, you know what to expect here. A stylish world, beautiful anime cutscenes, exciting turn-based combat with some real-time elements, a world-building magic system that plays into the character's backstory, interesting party customization, a split between building relationships and questing depending on the time of day, etc., etc. This is the kind of game I'd recommend watching a review for because it's hard to explain what makes or breaks an RPG and the little ins and outs of how they play without playing them. But the reception has been great, with the game being heralded as nearly flawless, and the consensus seems to be that if you love the Persona franchise, you'll love this too. Even at $70, assuming you don't have Game Pass. If you do, you can play Metaphor Refantatio right now for free. Next up is To a T, a cozy narrative adventure about a teen trying to make the best of life while stuck in a T-pose. And if that sounds ridiculous, the folks behind Katamari Damacy had a hand in this, so that should give you an idea of what you're in for. The highlight is of course its weirdness, and apart from the episodic story of self-discovery, there are mini-games, for better or worse, and you can explore the town with your canine companion. The game's been reviewed okay for being adorable, but there have been some complaints about it being too weird, or being too story and dialogue heavy in a way that, combined with clunky controls, makes everything outside of the cuteness either boring or frustrating to get through. So if you want to take a chance on To a T, you can play it now on Game Pass, but your mileage may vary. Next is Tales of Kyncera, which is included through EA Play. It's a side-scrolling adventure where you play as a young shaman who makes a deal with the god of death to bring his loved one back to life. The world is inspired by the culture and folklore of the Bantu tribes, and a lot of love went into the spirit of the game, given the personal journey of a man whose name I'll try to say how he said it, Abubba Karsalim. He's an actor, most recently known for House of the Dragon, and he's voiced characters in plenty of video games like Dragon Age Veilguard, Diablo 4, and the Assassin's Creed series, to name a few. He also founded the studio that developed this game. And while appreciation for its emotional story exploring grief has been echoed by those who played it, the final verdict seems to be that it's a game full of heart that's poorly executed, with the most common complaints I've seen being that it's a lackluster platformer with frustrating controls and barely any Metroidvania elements despite being marketed as one. So if you like the look and feel of Tales of Kyncera, you might still want to check it out, especially with it only clocking in at around 10 hours. And thanks to Game Pass, it won't cost you anything but time. Next, we have Monster Train 2, the sequel to the wildly popular roguelike deck builder. I think I talked about Monster Train in my last episode, and this is more of the same, only with new clans, new enemies, the addition of rune cards which apply boons to your train, and equipment cards that impart bonuses to units. And they finally added Endless Mode. This is one of those games where you're either already playing it or have already heard people raving about it, at least in the deck building space, so I won't talk too much about it. Players seem to love it across the board and agree that it's an improvement over the first game, with some even saying it's the best in the genre. So if Monster Train is your thing, you can hop into this equally successful follow-up right now on Game Pass, which I know I don't have to say is just a nice way to cap off an entry, and it's a habit. Next is Doom: The Dark Ages, and I don't think I have to explain this one. It's more Doom, though this is the prequel to the 2016 reboot and Doom Eternal, which differs in gameplay and aesthetic given the change of setting. While it's not exactly the same as its predecessor, id Software has yet again iterated on its formula in a satisfying way that players of the previous entries love just as much. I'd recommend watching a review if you want more details on the specific changes made from Eternal to the Dark Ages, but it's modern Doom. I already started playing it, and you know you want to play it, so play it while it's available on Game Pass. Moving on to another game that doesn't need much explaining, so I won't, we've got Warhammer Vermintide 2, a first-person, 4-player co-op melee action game set in the Warhammer universe where you mow down enemy hordes. This sequel to Vermintide has 15 careers to choose from, a new loot system that caters to the career you've chosen, new challenges, and a heroic deed system that modifies enemies, level settings, objectives, and more. I always say this, but I think every episode of Uncovered has at least one Warhammer game, and while this one is also very popular and fun to play with friends, there have been some criticisms about performance even on high-end PCs, as well as AI bot companions making single-player hard to progress without mods, and that the game is different now than it was when it launched, I believe in 2018, and not in a good way. So this is another one that might benefit from a comparison review. Otherwise, if you just want something chaotic, bloody, and fun to bash through with your pals, you can check out Warhammer Vermintide 2 on Game Pass. Next is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants Unleashed, and a lot of people hate it. It's basically a beat-em-up inspired by the recent TMNT film, with some unique fighting and relationship mechanics woven in. You can play solo or 2-player couch co-op, not 4, which is weird, but apparently intentional. And while many love the music and art style, though not necessarily the animation, the criticisms are vast, with the worst being the terrible load times, an abysmal camera, excessive cutscenes, the weird difficulty spike, and a poorly written, potentially cringeworthy story. There are also complaints about microtransactions and paid DLC being pushed despite the state the game is in. So ultimately it's up to you if you want to give the game a shot. Just be forewarned that it may not be the smoothest experience, even if you're a fan of the Heroes in a Half Shell. Next, we have Revenge of the Savage Planet, the sequel to the sci-fi co-op adventure Journey to the Savage Planet, and it's more of the same. There are currently 4 worlds to explore with new tools and abilities, and the highlight is again the game's wacky tone. But while it's still loved for its beauty and creativity, many had issues with optimization, including those who played on Steam Deck. And a common criticism is that the first game was geared more towards adults in its difficulty and handling of exploration, while this feels more like an overstimulating cakewalk for hyperactive kids. I enjoyed the first game, though I didn't finish it, and I haven't touched this one yet, so I'll leave it to you to decide if Revenge of the Savage Planet is another hit or a childish bit when you play it on Game Pass. Next up is Dredge from Black Salt Games based in New Zealand, and it's a cozy eldritch fishing game where you sail the seas exploring new islands, meeting NPCs, and collecting fish during the day while surviving the foggy terrors of the dark at night. There's a story that unfolds as you progress, completing quests and upgrading your ship, and while the game does have more than one ending, you can continue playing even after you've gotten it, because the game's last autosave is right before the endings. Now, I don't give my personal review of most games I list in Uncovered, either because I didn't play them or didn't play them enough, but I did play and beat Dredge, so I'll vouch for the positive reviews that it really is that good if you like relaxing games that also manage to be quietly tense and sometimes terrifying. My only issues were very minor, like how painfully slow your boat is when you first start out, which is easily rectified by upgrades it doesn't take too long to start getting, and the eventual abundance of crafting materials there was nothing to do with, which I believe is partly addressed with the DLC. So if you haven't played Dredge yet and the genre and style are your speed, I'd recommend that you play it right now on Game Pass. Next is Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, and while I'm both a fan of Dragon Ball and of fighting games, I'll have to defer to the players entirely on this one because I haven't checked out Xenoverse at all. The only thing I remember is that you get to create and customize your own character down to the moveset and explore the city while meeting and fighting with or against characters from the series. You also get to experience different locations from the series during different timelines, and there are multiplayer modes, raid battles, anything a fan of the series could want, with years worth of DLC that adds new characters and stories and pulls from Dragon Ball Z, Super, and some of the films. As for the cons, I haven't seen that many about the game itself beyond the price of the DLC and people who just want more from it, as well as more focus on the single-player experience. But there have been concerns about a recent update preventing a lot of PC players from playing online. Apparently, that's been an issue for a few weeks at the time I'm recording this, and I haven't seen any mention of a fix yet. I haven't heard about the same problem on console, but there may be other issues there that I missed, so if you're on PC specifically, you might want to look into this one a bit more before jumping in. Next is Anno 1800, a city builder set during the Industrial Revolution with all the bells and whistles you'd expect from the genre, like managing your city's evolution, navigating trade, politics, and warfare, plus some features new to the Anno franchise like expeditions. I'm not familiar with this series, so I'm again going to defer you to reviews from its core player base to understand the deeper mechanics of the game and whether or not it's a good fit, because some of the sentiments I've seen, besides hate for Ubisoft's broken game launcher from PC folks and an anti-consumer approach to the DLC, is that the game's focus has shifted a lot from earlier entries, that its systems are a bit complicated to understand with a tutorial that's lacking, and that it would benefit from things like scenarios rather than feeling like one long slog. So this is one that I'm putting on your radar if you're a fan of expansive period city builders, but I have nothing to guide you on how it plays, like if it has a balanced economy, etc. So if Anno 1800 looks interesting to you, do a little digging, then try it for yourself on Game Pass. From there, we have Towerborn, a self-described looter brawler with a mix of action RPG and side-scrolling elements, where you team up with other heroes to defend against dark forces, and you can play solo or with up to 3 players online. This one is a mixed bag. While the player base seems to be in agreement that the game is polished, easy to pick up, and fun at first, there's some complaints about repetitiveness and balancing once you've progressed to higher levels, the loot system being a bit grindy, the gear being a bit boring, the hub being a bit empty, and the push for microtransactions being a bit aggressive. And it's important to note that the game is currently in early access with plans to go free-to-play on launch, so make of that what you will if you're not a fan of the typical free-to-play model. Ultimately, it seems to be a game with good bones that will either sink or swim on what the developers choose to offer in exchange for the time sink. And if that's time you're willing to sink to at least test it out, you can play Towerborn right now on Game Pass. Speaking of free-to-play, I'm not going into this one at all. I'm just letting you know that Splitgate 2, the shooter with portals, was added to Game Pass. There's been a lot of chatter out there about what the game was promised to be and what it isn't, and a lot of drama around CEO comments and how they don't reflect where the game seems to be headed compared to its predecessor. So you probably want to look into that if you were a fan of the first game and are interested in the discourse around this one. I'm not, but I figured I'd mention it because I think it was only added to Xbox in early June. Moving on, we've got Commandos Origins, the follow-up to the Commandos series that's also a prequel to it and a modern reboot, while retaining its classic real-time tactics approach. Set in World War II, it features 6 commandos with their own specializations that you'll use to stealth, drive, plan, and snipe your way through missions. You'll tackle several in what's meant to be environments authentic to World War II, and there's 2-player co-op, both online and local split screen. The feedback on this one varies wildly depending on where you go, and if the player is a veteran of the series. Some love it for the stealth mechanics and the attention to detail in the location, while others hate it or at least struggle to recommend it for the bugs and technical issues, as well as the loss of features from earlier entries like an inventory that make it feel watered down, the clunky controls, problems with the save system, and a general sense that the series lost its sauce, with this entry being a step back in most directions. This may be one of those times when you'll have a better experience if you're new to Commandos, having nothing to compare it to except similar games in the genre, which it still isn't seen as living up to for some. Either way, it sounds like it needs more time in the oven, so you may want to put this one on your watch list and wait for some patches, or you can roll the dice and jump into Commandos Origins right now on Game Pass. Next is Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time, the direct sequel to the original trilogy. And speaking of time, I'm not spending a lot of it on this one, though you might. It's a very well-made game, so play it for the nostalgia, but if you decide you want to finish it, or worse, 100% it, get ready to be reminded how irritating games like this were to play growing up. Moving on to some games that probably aren't for your age group, though you may have kids or younger siblings, or just like stuff geared towards the youth. We've got Tempopo, a musical puzzle game where you play as a little girl whose flowers are lost to the wind, so she conducts the unwieldy Tempopos through levels spanning the 4 seasons to help bring them back. The aesthetic is cute, the music is nice relative to your taste, and the puzzles can be tricky but satisfying, though there have been some complaints about the amount of trial and error it takes to solve them. Then there's Barbie Project Friendship, an adventure game where you help Barbie and her friends save their community center, which I'd find hilarious if it was in the style of every dance competition flick. But here you explore Malibu and help transform 6 different spaces in the neighborhood, including a crafting studio and animal care center, and you can have fun with different tasks, including mini games that you can play solo or couch co-op. And last but not least in this category is the Patrick Star game, more formally known as SpongeBob SquarePants TM, the Patrick Star game, where you play as Patrick in a physics-based sandbox adventure set in Bikini Bottom. It's definitely one of those games that's just meant to be silly for a little while. I honestly can't see anyone spending actual money on it, even as a joke, but that's the beauty of Game Pass. You don't have to spend money on it, you can play these games for free. Next are some simulator games, which I don't normally have a category for. There just happen to be enough of them this time around that I decided to stick them all together. Starting with Crime Scene Cleaner, where you clean up after the mob. It's what you'd expect. You make money, you upgrade your tools, you make more money, and you have a relaxing time washing away other people's sins. It's very popular, very addictive, very fun. Then there's Firefighting Simulator The Squad, which you can play solo or with up to 3 friends. This one leans more into the sim part, where you navigate the life of a firefighter in a big city with authentic equipment and vehicles, and a complex physics system with advanced fire, water, and smoke simulation. It's a good time if you want what feels like a true firefighting experience without too much focus on realism, though there have been complaints that the recent update to support crossplay turned the game into an unplayable buggy mess. There's also Police Simulator Patrol Officers, where you play as an officer on patrol, working your way through the ranks to unlock new districts and take on new responsibilities, whether it's tracing down drug dealers or doling out parking tickets. There's a traffic system, 3 districts in total with their own distinct neighborhoods, different cars to drive, a casual mode for players that want to take things slow, and it's Steam Deck verified. But it's also jank verified, at least on PC, since the main complaints are that the game is riddled with bugs, and even when it works, it's pretty boring, with the tasks being very menial, no story to follow, and no shooting or combat for those who want that in their 5.0 experience. Feedback has been a bit more positive on console, but it all depends on your taste. And finally, there's Spray Paint Simulator, which is geared towards those who loved Power Wash, only this one has some fundamental issues. A big one being that if you want to play co-op, you have to beat everything solo first, and there's no real incentive to do so otherwise. There's also a lack of content, though to be fair, the game is pretty new, and the balance of fun versus tedium isn't consistent from level to level, with the one I hear the most complaints about being the level with the bridge. Basically, it's a game with potential, but whether it reaches that or not seems to depend on where the developers go from here. Getting close to the end, we've got some collections, remakes, and the like. There was the surprise Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion remaster, and I really loved Oblivion, but I have way too many games I want to get through to play new versions of old ones, so you guys can have fun with that. They added Xbox Retro Classics, which includes over 50 restored games like Pitfall, though they can only be played through cloud gaming, and a lot of people have said that the streaming experience isn't that great, so it's probably worse if you're on a slow network. Then there's the bundle for the Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 Enhanced Editions, which was very hard for me to say for some reason. For Baldur's Gate 1, it includes the original campaign, the Sword Coast expansion, and new challenges in the Black Pits. There's also a brand new expansion, Siege of Dragonspear, that adds over 25 hours of adventuring. For Baldur's Gate 2, it includes the original Shadows of Amn campaign, the Throne of Baal expansion, and new challenges in the Black Pits as well. They also added the Warhammer 40k Space Marine Master Crafted Edition, which features 4K res on Series X, improved textures and character models, remastered audio, and an overhaul of the interface and controls. And this edition includes the original Space Marine game, along with all of the DLC. It also supports crossplay. Finally, there's Warcraft 1 and 2 Remastered and Warcraft 3 Reforged. Though they're not bundled together, they're separate. 1 and 2 mainly improved the visuals and modernized the controls, while 3 also got some new matchmaking features, revamped map designs, updates to the lore, and more. Now we have the section I always barrel through, featuring annual, frequent, or well-known franchise releases in shooters and sports. Not so much because I don't play them, but because I don't need to explain them. They added GTA 5 for Xbox One, Far Cry 4, the cross-gen bundle of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which includes the Xbox One and Series S and X versions, Call of Duty World War II, Tom Clancy's The Division 2, NHL 2025, which is available through EA Play, and EA Sports Football Club 2025. There are also a few games added to the library that I didn't mention in the last episode because I was going to play them on the channel and no longer have the time. That was Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Orcs Must Die Death Trap, and a very pretty puzzle game, Shady Part of Me. There are also some other exclusions you've come to expect, like games that were covered in the past and brought back. In this case, Rise of the Tomb Raider and Against the Storm. So if you're new to the series, consider Uncovered a fresh list of what's being added, not an exhaustive one. Now, wrapping this up, in case you haven't noticed, Microsoft has been pushing their deals just for you, which are what they sound like. Their sales presented to you based on your Game Pass membership, your gaming history, prior purchases, and I'm sure other metrics I'd be curious to learn more about. And the deals can be crazy, like randomly being offered 90% off a game the system thinks you'd like. I personally haven't bought anything yet, not because the choices weren't good, but I just have a lot of stuff I want to get through that I didn't spend money on. But I figured I'd give you a heads up to keep an eye out when browsing the Microsoft Store, because you may come across some deals unique to you that won't last forever. I also wanted to mention, for those of you who always watch this series, that I finally rejoined the Sony ecosystem. So I'll be spending some time learning about PlayStation's memberships and deciding if I want to create an equivalent series for that. It seems like there may be a lot of overlap with the games included, so I'll probably only talk about Sony exclusives, but I don't know enough about PS Plus, etc. yet to figure that out. So whenever I do, you'll know because you'll see the videos. You can also let me know in the comments what you'd like to see focused on as far as PlayStation goes, so I can keep that in mind. As for this episode, I'll post a link to every game in the box, so let me know if you've been playing any of these. Thanks so much for watching. Hit the like button on your way out to help this spread, and I'll see you back here soon with more Uncovered.